The distant crack of a gunshot startled Katherine Blackett from her daydream, her fingers freezing on the last button of her blouse as her gaze darted to the window of her family's modest cabin. It was 1876 in Rico, Colorado, and the small mining town was growing restless with each passing day as tensions rose between the miners and the company men. But Katherine's fear stemmed from someone else entirely. "Katherine, are you dressed yet?" Her father's voice boomed from downstairs. "Mr. Orwell will be here any minute." Katherine's stomach twisted into knots at the mention of Victor Orwell, the wealthiest man in Rico, and her soon-to-be husband a marriage arranged without her consent or consideration. At 21, she had always imagined a different life for herself, perhaps with Zachary O'Malley, the cowboy who had stolen her heart when they were barely more than children. "Coming, father," she called back, her voice wavering despite her attempt to sound composed. She tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her green eyes looked back at her, filled with a resigned sadness that she couldn't hide. The Katherine of last year would never have recognized this defeated woman staring back at her. Footsteps on the porch sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her body. Victor Orwell had arrived, and with him, the crushing weight of her future. At 45, Victor was more than twice her age, with cold eyes that seemed to calculate her worth like one of his business ledgers. He owned half the businesses in Rico, including the bank that held the loan on her father's struggling ranch. "Katherine." Her father called again, this time with urgency. She descended the stairs, each step feeling like she was walking to her own execution. In the small front room stood Victor Orwell, dressed in an expensive black suit, his silver-streaked dark hair slicked back. Beside him, her father looked diminished, his once proud shoulders now bent with worry and debt. "Ah, there she is," Victor said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Beautiful as always, my dear." "Mr. Orwell," Katherine acknowledged with a slight nod, avoiding his gaze. "Please call me Victor. We are to be married in 3 days after all." Her father cleared his throat nervously. "Katherine has been preparing for the wedding. Everything will be ready by Saturday." "Excellent," Victor replied, his thin lips forming what might pass for a smile. "I've brought something for my bride-to-be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a gold ring with a diamond that caught the light streaming through the windows. It was ostentatious, nothing like what Katherine would have chosen for herself. "It's lovely," she lied, accepting the box with trembling fingers. "Only the best for an Orwell wife," Victor stated proudly. "I expect you to wear it immediately. I want everyone in town to know you belong to me." Belong. The word echoed in Katherine's mind like a prison door slamming shut. She slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling its weight like a shackle. "I have business to attend to, but I'll see you tomorrow for dinner at my home," Victor announced. 7 o'clock sharp. "We have wedding details to discuss." He tipped his hat to her father. "Mr. Blackett, I trust you'll ensure she's punctual." After Victor departed, the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Katherine turned to her father, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "Father, please, not now, Katherine," he interrupted, his voice weary. "This arrangement is best for everyone. Victor Orwell can save our ranch, give you a comfortable life." "But I don't love him," she whispered. "In fact, her father scoffed. "Love doesn't pay debts, girl. Love doesn't keep a roof over your head or food on the table." He softened slightly at the sight of her distress. "You'll learn to care for him in time." Katherine doubted that very much. How could she ever care for a man whose very presence made her tremble with fear? A man who looked at her like she was another property acquisition. "I need some air," she said suddenly, grabbing her shawl from the hook by the door. "Don't wander far," her father warned, "and be back before dark." Katherine nodded and slipped outside, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The town of Rico lay below them, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. The place had grown significantly since silver was discovered in the mountains, bringing with it men like Victor Orwell who saw opportunity in every rock and stream. She began walking toward her favorite spot, a small clearing near the creek where she often went to think. The sound of horseshoes on the rocky path behind her made her turn, and her heart nearly stopped. Zachary O'Malley rode toward her, tall and broad-shouldered atop his chestnut stallion. The afternoon sun caught in his sandy blonde hair, and his familiar blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "Cat," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her. He dismounted in one fluid motion, standing before her with his hat in his hands. "I heard the news in town." Katherine felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Of course, everyone would know by now. Rico wasn't large enough for secrets. "Yes," she replied simply, unable to meet his gaze. "You can't marry him, Kat," Zach said, stepping closer. "Orwell he's not a good man. The things I've heard about how he treats people, how he deals with those who cross him." "I have no choice, Zach," Katherine interrupted, finally looking up at him. "Father owes him money, a lot of money. If I don't marry Victor, we lose everything." Zach's jaw tightened. "There's always a choice." He took another step toward her, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of leather and open air that always clung to him. "Run away with me." Katherine's heart leapt at his words, even as her mind raced with all the reasons she couldn't possibly accept. "Zach, I mean it, Kat. I've been saving for years, working cattle drives, breaking horses. I've got land now, a small place north of here. It's not much, but it's mine, free and clear." His eyes held hers. "It could be ours." The dream of it nearly overwhelmed her. A life with Zach, away from Victor's cold stare and calculating eyes. They had grown up together, children running wild in the hills around Rico. Somewhere along the way, their friendship had blossomed into something more, something they'd both been too young to fully understand or act upon. Then Zach had left to find work, to make something of himself, and Katherine had remained, watching and waiting for his infrequent returns. "My father would want you to be happy," Zach finished for her. "Deep down, you know he would." Katherine shook her head, tears now falling freely. "It's not that simple. Victor would come after us. He's powerful, Zach. He has connections, men who work for him. He wouldn't just let me go." Zach's hand reached for hers, his fingers warm and calloused from years of hard work. When he felt the ring on her finger, he flinched slightly but didn't let go. "I don't care how powerful he is," Zach declared. "You're not his, Kat. You never will be." His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "You're mine, always have been since we were kids, and I'm yours." The words sent a shiver through Katherine's body. It was everything she'd longed to hear for years, now spoken when it seemed too late. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice small and unsure. Zach squeezed her hand. "Meet me tomorrow night at our spot by the creek. Midnight, I'll have horses ready, supplies packed." "Zach, just think about it," he urged. "That's all I'm asking. Think about us, about what could be." Before Katherine could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. Two of Victor's men were riding up the path, no doubt sent to check on her. Zach quickly released her hand and stepped back. "Tomorrow night," he whispered. "Midnight." He mounted his horse and tipped his hat as Victor's men approached. They nodded curtly to him, a gesture barely qualifying as civil. Zach rode off, not looking back, though Katherine could feel his concern radiating from him like heat from a fire. "Miss Blackett," one of Victor's men addressed her, "Mr. Orwell was concerned when he heard you'd left the house alone. He's asked us to escort you back." "That's not necessary," Katherine protested. "I was just getting some air." "Mr. Orwell insists," the man replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. As they escorted her back to the cabin, Katherine's mind raced with thoughts of Zach's offer. Run away with him, leave behind everything she knew for a chance at happiness, a chance at love, but also a chance at danger, at bringing Victor's wrath down not just on herself but on Zach and possibly her father as well. The weight of the diamond ring felt even heavier on her finger now. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to decide her fate. Back at the cabin, her father waited anxiously on the porch. He frowned at the sight of Victor's men but said nothing until they'd departed. "What were you thinking, wandering off like that?" he demanded once they were alone. "I told you I needed air," Katherine replied, moving past him into the house. "Was that Zachary O'Malley I saw riding away?" Her father followed her inside, his voice sharp with suspicion. Katherine busied herself with the kettle, avoiding his gaze. "We just happened to cross paths, Katherine." Her father's tone made her finally turn to face him. "Whatever foolish ideas that boy might have put in your head, you need to forget them. Victor Orwell is not a man to be crossed. If you're thinking of 'I'm going to marry him, father,'" Katherine interrupted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Isn't that what you want?" Her father's expression softened slightly. "I want what's best for you, for us. This marriage will secure our future." "At what cost?" she whispered. "Sometimes in life we must make sacrifices," he replied, sounding rehearsed, as if he'd been telling himself the same thing. "You'll have a good life with Victor, a comfortable one. Comfort without love, without happiness." It seemed a poor bargain to Katherine. But she nodded, not trusting herself to speak further without revealing the turmoil inside her. That night, sleep eluded her as she stared at the ceiling, weighing her options. To stay meant security for her father, but a lifetime of fear and unhappiness for herself. To leave meant freedom, love, and Zach, but also uncertainty and the risk of Victor's vengeance. As dawn broke over the mountains, Katherine realized she had not made a decision. She would have to face Victor at dinner that evening, still torn between duty and desire, between fear and hope. The day passed in a blur of wedding preparations that felt increasingly hollow. Katherine's mother had died when she was just 12, so there was no maternal guidance to help her through this difficult time. Instead, Mrs. Peterson, their nearest neighbor, had stepped in to assist with the wedding dress and other arrangements. "You'll make a beautiful bride," Mrs. Peterson commented as she pinned the hem of Katherine's white dress. And Mrs. Orwell imagined that, the most prominent name in Rico. Katherine forced a smile but said nothing. The dress felt like a shroud rather than a celebration of new beginnings. As evening approached, she dressed carefully for dinner at Victor's mansion, the largest house in Rico, built with the profits from his mining investments and various businesses. The coach he sent for her arrived precisely at 6:30, another demonstration of his controlling nature. Victor's home was intimidating, a testament to wealth rather than taste, with imported furnishings and artwork that seemed designed to impress rather than create comfort. He greeted her in the foyer, taking her hand and pressing his lips to it in a gesture that left her skin crawling. "You look lovely tonight, my dear," he said, leading her into a dining room where a table had been set for two. Crystal glasses caught the light from an ornate chandelier, and silver cutlery gleamed on the polished surface. "Your home is impressive," Katherine managed, taking the seat a servant pulled out for her. "It will be your home too, very soon," Victor reminded her, taking his place at the head of the table. "Though I expect you'll want to make some changes. Women always do." The dinner that followed was an exercise in restraint for Katherine. Victor spoke at length about his businesses, his political connections, and his plans for expanding his influence in the territory. He barely asked Katherine a single question about herself, clearly more interested in having an audience than a conversation partner. "I've arranged for us to travel to Denver after the wedding," he announced as dessert was served. "I have business there, and you can shop for whatever you might need for the house." "That sounds nice," Katherine replied, pushing her barely touched cake around her plate. Victor studied her with narrowed eyes. "You seem distracted tonight. I hope you're not having second thoughts about our arrangement." The threat was subtle but unmistakable in his tone. Their arrangement wasn't something she had any say in, and they both knew it. "Of course not," she lied. "I'm just overwhelmed with the wedding preparations." "I see." Victor set down his fork with precision. "I should tell you, Katherine, that I saw Zachary O'Malley watching the house earlier today." Katherine's heart stuttered in her chest. "Oh, yes." Victor's voice was casual, but his eyes were cold. "A rather persistent young man, isn't he? I understand you two were close when you were younger." "Childhood friends," Katherine said carefully. "Nothing more." "Good." Victor smiled thinly. "Because I would hate to think that my future wife had inappropriate attachments. I'm not a man who shares what belongs to me." There it was again, that notion of ownership that made Katherine feel like one of Victor's possessions rather than his future wife. "I think I should return home," Katherine said suddenly, unable to bear another minute in his presence. "It's getting late." Victor checked his pocket watch. "Barely 8 o'clock, my dear, but if you insist, I'll have my driver take you." The ride home was mercifully short, giving Katherine little time to dwell on the growing sense of dread that filled her. Once home, she pleaded fatigue to her father and retreated to her room, where she sat by the window, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Midnight seemed an eternity away. As the hours crept by, Katherine packed a small bag with her most essential belongings: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, a few personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind. The rest would have to stay. She wrote a letter to her father, explaining her decision as best she could, begging his forgiveness and promising to contact him when it was safe. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had to offer. As the clock in the hallway struck 11, Katherine changed into her riding clothes, tying her hair back under a plain hat. She tucked the letter under her father's door, then crept down the stairs and out the back door, careful not to make a sound. The night was clear, the moon providing enough light for her to make her way through the familiar terrain toward the creek. Her heart pounded with each step, torn between excitement and terror. Was she making the right choice? Would Zach really be there waiting? And if he was, could they truly escape Victor's reach? The clearing by the creek appeared ahead, and Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Zach was there, just as he'd promised, with 2 horses saddled and ready. He turned at the sound of her approach, his face breaking into a smile of such genuine joy that it banished her doubts, if only for a moment. "You came," he said simply, moving forward to take her hands in his. "I couldn't marry him, Zach. I just couldn't." He pulled her into an embrace, and for the first time in weeks, Katherine felt safe. "We'll leave Rico tonight," he murmured into her hair. "Head north into the mountains. I know places where Orwell's men won't find us." Katherine nodded against his chest, then stepped back, suddenly remembering something important. She pulled Victor's ring from her finger and placed it on a flat rock near the creek. "I'm not his," she declared, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I never was." Zach's smile deepened. "No, you weren't." He helped her mount one of the horses, then swung up onto his own. Ready, Katherine took one last look at the town below, the lights of Rico twinkling in the valley. Somewhere down there was the life she was leaving behind: her father, her home, everything familiar. But ahead was Zach, and the promise of something true and real. "Ready," she answered, turning her horse to follow his into the darkness of the trail. They rode through the night, keeping to less traveled paths that wound higher into the mountains. Zach seemed to know every trail, every crossing, guiding them with confidence through the darkness. They spoke little, focusing on putting distance between themselves and Rico. As dawn broke, they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream. Katherine dismounted stiffly, her muscles aching from the long ride. Zach handed her a canteen of water and some jerky from his saddlebag. "We'll rest here for an hour, then keep moving," he said, scanning the horizon behind them. "There's a cabin about half a day's ride from here where we can stay tonight. Belongs to an old trapper I worked for once. He's gone south for the winter." Katherine nodded, too exhausted to speak. The reality of what they'd done was beginning to sink in. She was now a runaway bride, fleeing a powerful man who would likely send people after them. Her father would wake to find her gone, with only a letter to explain her absence. "Are you all right?" Zach asked, concern etching his features as he sat beside her on a fallen log. "Just tired," she replied, trying to smile. "And scared, I suppose." Zach took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I know, but we're going to be fine, Kat, I promise. Once we're far enough away, we can start over, build something together." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart swell with hope. This was Zach, her Zach, the boy who had taught her to fish in this very stream, who had always been there when she needed him, until life had pulled them in different directions. "I've missed you," she said softly. "All those years you were gone. I missed you too, every day." His eyes held hers. "But I needed to become something more than a ranch hand before I could come back for you. I needed to have something to offer." "You were always enough," Katherine told him, squeezing his hand. They rested briefly, then continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains where the air grew thin and the trail narrowed. By late afternoon, they reached the cabin Zach had mentioned, a sturdy structure built of logs and stone, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. "It's not much," Zach said as he helped Katherine down from her horse, "but it's solid and warm." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with chairs, and a narrow bed in one corner. Zach busied himself building a fire while Katherine unpacked the few supplies they'd brought. As night fell, they sat before the crackling fire, sharing a simple meal of beans and hard tack. The domesticity of the moment struck Katherine. This could be their life, simple but free, together rather than trapped in a loveless marriage. "Tomorrow we'll head for my land," Zach explained, pouring her a cup of coffee. "It's about 2 days' ride from here. We should be safe there. It's remote. Not many folks know about it." "What's it like?" Katherine asked, warming her hands on the tin cup. Zach's face lit up with pride. "It's beautiful, Kat. A small valley with good water, enough flat land for crops and hills for grazing. I've built a cabin bigger than this one, with 2 rooms and a proper kitchen. It's rough still, but with time." "It sounds perfect," Katherine said, meaning it. She could imagine it a simple life, hard work, but with love at its center rather than fear. "Once we're settled, I'll send word to your father," Zach continued. "Let him know you're safe. Maybe in time he can visit." Katherine nodded, grateful for Zach's understanding of the bond she shared with her father, despite his role in arranging the marriage to Victor. "I hope he'll forgive me." "He will," Zach assured her. "He loves you, Kat. He thought he was doing what was best." As the fire died down to embers, exhaustion overwhelmed them both. Zach insisted Katherine take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor near the fire. Despite her protests, he was adamant. "I've slept under the stars for years, Kat. A cabin floor is luxury by comparison." She relented, too tired to argue, and slipped under the rough blankets, falling asleep almost instantly to the sound of Zach's steady breathing and the occasional pop from the dying fire. Morning came with a brightness that suggested fresh snow had fallen overnight. Katherine awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon cooking over a rekindled fire. Zach stood at the small stove, his back to her, humming softly as he worked. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and pushing her hair from her face. Zach turned, a smile warming his features. "Morning, sleepyhead. Thought you might sleep the day away." "What time is it?" she asked, suddenly concerned they'd lingered too long. "Just past 7, he replied, setting a plate of food on the table. "We've got plenty of daylight left. Eat something, then we'll head out." They ate quickly, then packed up their meager supplies. Outside, the world was transformed by a light dusting of snow that glittered in the morning sun. Their horses, sheltered in a lean-to beside the cabin, nickered in greeting as they approached with saddles. "Weather's turning," Zach observed, looking at the sky. "We need to make good time today, get through the pass before more snow comes." They rode hard through the morning, following a trail that grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains. The pass Zach had mentioned loomed ahead, a narrow gap between two towering peaks. By midday, they had reached it, the wind whipping around them as they guided their horses through the treacherous terrain. On the other side, the land began to descend, offering some relief from the biting wind. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hard bread. Katherine was about to remount when Zach suddenly stiffened, his hand going to the rifle strapped to his saddle. "What is it?" she whispered, following his gaze back toward the pass. "Riders," he replied grimly. "3, maybe 4, coming fast." Katherine's blood ran cold. "Victor's men." "Most likely." Zach handed her the reins to her horse. "Mount up. We need to move. Now." They set off at a gallop, descending the mountain trail as quickly as they dared. The path was treacherous, winding between boulders and trees, sometimes barely wide enough for a horse to pass. Katherine's heart pounded in her chest, fear giving her a reckless courage as she followed Zach's lead. The sound of hoofbeats behind them grew louder. Their pursuers were gaining ground, likely more familiar with the terrain than Katherine and perhaps even Zach. "There." Zach pointed to a dense thicket of pine trees off the main trail. "Follow me." They veered off the path, pushing through the underbrush into the shelter of the trees. Zach dismounted quickly, helping Katherine down from her horse. "Stay low," he instructed, tying the horses to a tree. "They might ride past us." But luck wasn't with them. The sound of horses slowing, then stopping on the trail made it clear that their pursuers hadn't been fooled. "O'Malley," a voice called out. "We know you're in there. Bring out the girl and we might let you live." Zach's jaw tightened as he drew his pistol. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Katherine. "Come on, O'Malley," the voice called again. "Mr. Orwell just wants his bride back. No need for bloodshed." "We can't outrun them," Zach said quietly, "and we can't outgun them. There are at least 4 of them." Katherine felt panic rising in her chest. "What do we do?" Zach's eyes scanned their surroundings, calculating. "There's a ravine about half a mile west of here. If we can reach it, we might lose them in the rocks." "Enough talk." The voice from the trail was losing patience. "You've got 1 minute before we come in shooting." Zach looked at Katherine, determination hardening his features. "When I start firing, run for the horses. Head west along the tree line. I'll be right behind you." "Zach, no, trust me, Kat." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not going to let them take you back to him." Before she could protest further, Zach rose slightly and fired 3 rapid shots toward the trail. Shouts and the sound of men diving for cover gave them their moment. Katherine ran for the horses, untying them with trembling hands as bullets splintered the trees around them. Zach appeared beside her, blood streaming from a graze on his arm. "Go!" he shouted, helping her mount before swinging up onto his own horse. They crashed through the underbrush, emerging from the trees further down the slope. Behind them, Victor's men were scrambling to remount, yelling orders and curses. Zach led them west, pushing their horses to a dangerous pace across the uneven ground. The ravine appeared ahead of them, a jagged cut in the earth like a wound in the mountainside. It was deeper than Katherine had expected, with a narrow trail winding down one side. "Follow me exactly," Zach called over his shoulder, guiding his horse onto the steep path. Katherine's heart was in her throat as they descended, the trail barely wide enough for their horses. One misstep could send them plummeting to the rocks below. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the edge of the ravine. A shot rang out, the bullet striking rock near Katherine's head, sending fragments flying. Her horse reared in panic, nearly throwing her from the saddle. "Kat!" Zach's voice was frantic as he reached for her reins, steadying her mount. They continued down, finally reaching the bottom of the ravine where a small stream flowed between the rocks. Zach led them along the water, using it to cover their tracks. "They won't risk the descent on horseback," he explained, his voice tight with pain from his wounded arm. "They'll have to go around. That gives us some time." They followed the stream for nearly an hour, the ravine gradually widening until it opened into a broader valley. As they emerged, Zach began to sway in his saddle, his face pale. "Zach." Katherine urged her horse alongside his, reaching out to steady him. "You're hurt worse than you said." "I'm all right," he insisted, though his voice was weak. "We need to keep moving," but Katherine could see the bloodstain spreading on his sleeve. "We need to stop to tend to your wound." Zach looked ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "There's a place not far from here. An old mining camp, abandoned years ago. We can rest there, just long enough for you to bandage this." They rode for another half-hour, Zach growing visibly weaker, but refusing to stop until they reached the abandoned camp, a collection of dilapidated shacks clustered around the remains of a mine entrance. They chose the sturdiest of the structures, a small cabin that still had most of its roof intact. Inside, Katherine helped Zach out of his jacket and shirt, revealing the bullet wound on his upper arm. It wasn't just a graze, as he'd claimed the bullet had torn through muscle, leaving an ugly wound that bled freely. "You need a doctor," Katherine said, trying to keep the fear from her voice as she used water from their canteens to clean the injury. "No doctors around here," Zach replied through gritted teeth. "Just do what you can." Katherine tore strips from one of her petticoats to make bandages, working as quickly and carefully as she could. Zach winced but made no sound as she wrapped the wound tightly. "There," she said when she'd finished. "It's not perfect, but it should hold until we reach your land." "Thank you." Zach caught her hand, his eyes serious. "Kat, if something happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen to you," she interrupted fiercely. "We're going to make it together." He smiled weakly. "That's my girl, always stubborn." They rested for an hour, Zach dozing fitfully while Katherine kept watch at the small window, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The sun was beginning to set when Zach stirred, pushing himself up with a grimace. "We should move," he said. "Travel through the night, they'll expect us to camp." "Are you sure you're strong enough?" Katherine asked, concerned by the pallor of his skin. "I have to be," he replied simply. They set out again as twilight deepened into night. Zach seemed to draw strength from some inner reserve, sitting straighter in his saddle as they rode. He kept them moving at a steady pace, following paths only he seemed to see in the darkness. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, the mountains giving way to rolling foothills. Zach pointed ahead to a distant line of trees. "That's the northern boundary of my land," he told Katherine, a note of pride in his voice despite his exhaustion. "We're almost home." The word home sent a surge of emotion through Katherine. Home, not the cabin she'd shared with her father, nor the mansion Victor had planned for her, but a place she and Zach would build together. They reached the trees as the sun climbed higher, following a small creek that wound through the property. As they rounded a bend, Zach's cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of logs and stone, with a small corral beside it and a garden plot marked out nearby. "It's wonderful," Katherine breathed, taking in the sight of what would be their home. Zach's smile was tired but genuine. "It will be once you put your touch on it." They dismounted, Zach moving stiffly, his wound clearly paining him. Inside, the cabin was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace, a table with chairs, and a bed with a handmade quilt. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and a few books. "Rest," Katherine instructed, helping Zach to the bed. "I'll take care of the horses and get a fire started." For once, he didn't argue, a testament to how exhausted and weak he truly was. Katherine tended to the horses, bringing them water and feed from the small barn behind the cabin. She found firewood stacked neatly by the door and soon had a fire crackling in the hearth. She checked Zach's wound, relieved to find that while it looked angry and inflamed, it didn't show signs of serious infection. She cleaned and rebandaged it, then made a simple meal from the supplies in the cabin's cupboards. Zach drifted in and out of sleep throughout the day, occasionally waking long enough to take water or broth. Katherine kept busy, familiarizing herself with the cabin and its surroundings, always keeping a watchful eye on the approach from the south. As night fell again, she sat by Zach's bed, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth. His fever had risen, and he murmured restlessly in his sleep. Katherine felt fear grip her heart. They were miles from any doctor, and she had only the most basic knowledge of treating wounds. "Please, Zach," she whispered, taking his hand in hers. "You have to be all right. I can't lose you now." Whether it was her voice or her touch, Zach's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face. "Kat," he murmured, "you're really here. I was afraid I'd dreamed it." "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "And I'm not going anywhere," he smiled weakly. "Good. Because I've been waiting years to have you by my side." "Rest," she told him softly. "You need to recover your strength." The next few days passed in a blur of nursing and vigilance. Katherine divided her time between caring for Zach and keeping watch for Victor's men. The fever broke on the third day, and Zach began to regain his strength, sitting up in bed and then, despite Katherine's protests, moving around the cabin. "We should be safe here," he assured her as they sat before the fire one evening, a week after their arrival. "This land isn't on any maps yet. And even if Orwell's men tracked us this far, they'd have to know exactly where to look." Katherine wished she could share his confidence, but the fear of Victor finding them lingered. What if they keep searching? Victor isn't a man who gives up easily. Zach took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as he'd done by the stream that first morning. "Then we'll deal with it together. But Kat, we can't live in fear forever." She knew he was right. The constant anxiety was exhausting, casting a shadow over what should be the beginning of their life together. "We need to send word to your father," Zach continued. "Let him know you're safe. There's a trading post about a day's ride from here. I can go when I'm stronger. Send a letter." The thought of Zach leaving, even for a day, filled Katherine with dread. "Not yet," she pleaded. "Not until you're fully healed," he nodded, understanding her fear. "All right, a few more days." Those few days stretched into 2 weeks as they settled into a routine on the small homestead. Katherine discovered she enjoyed the work tending the garden, cooking meals, making the cabin more comfortable with small touches. Zach regained his strength rapidly, soon able to handle the more strenuous tasks around the property. They spoke often of their plans for the future, expanding the cabin, increasing the garden, adding livestock beyond the few chickens, and the milk cow already in residence. They avoided talking about the past, about Victor and the threat he represented, as if not speaking of him might make him fade away like a bad dream. But reality intruded one morning when they spotted dust on the horizon riders approaching from the south. Zach was splitting wood near the corral when he noticed it, immediately dropping his axe and calling for Katherine, who was hanging laundry to dry. "Get inside," he instructed, his voice tense. "Take the rifle and stay away from the windows." Katherine hurried to obey, her heart pounding as she retrieved the Winchester rifle from its place above the door. She watched through a crack in the shutters as Zach positioned himself on the porch, his hand resting casually near the pistol on his hip. As the riders drew closer, Katherine held her breath. There were 3 of them, moving at a steady pace rather than the gallop of pursuers. When they were near enough to make out features, Zach's stance suddenly relaxed. "It's all right, Kat," he called. "It's Ben Miller and his boys." Katherine exhaled in relief, setting aside the rifle and joining Zach on the porch as their visitors arrived. Ben Miller was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, who greeted Zach with a hearty handshake. "Thought I'd ride over and check on my new neighbor," Ben explained, dismounting with the ease of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Heard you'd finally moved onto your claim." His gaze shifted to Katherine, curiosity evident in his expression. "Ben, this is Katherine Blackett," Zach introduced her, a note of pride in his voice. "My wife." The lie, or rather, the anticipation of truth took Katherine by surprise, but she quickly recovered, extending her hand to Ben. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Miller." "Likewise, Mrs. O'Malley," Ben replied, tipping his hat. "These are my sons, Thomas and John." The young men, who looked to be in their late teens or early 20s, nodded politely from atop their horses. "Come inside," Zach invited. "Kat makes a fine cup of coffee." As they settled around the table with steaming mugs, Ben shared news of the area weather patterns, livestock prices, the comings and goings of other settlers. Katherine found herself relaxing, grateful for this glimpse of normal life after weeks of tension. "Oh, nearly forgot," Ben said as they were finishing their coffee. "Got word from town that there's been some strangers asking questions. Looking for a young couple, they said. Offered a reward for information." Katherine's hand trembled, causing her coffee to slosh in its cup. Zach reached over, covering her hand with his own. "What kind of strangers?" he asked casually, though Katherine could feel the tension in him. Ben shrugged. "City men by the look of them. Well-dressed. Had the sheriff with them when they came to my place, so they must have some official business." "What did you tell them?" Zach's voice remained even, but Katherine could hear the undertone of concern. "Told them I hadn't seen any strangers," Ben replied. "But Zach, if you and your wife are in some kind of trouble." "Not trouble," Zach assured him. "Just a disagreement with Katherine's former employer. Nothing to concern yourself with." Ben didn't look entirely convinced, but nodded anyway. "Well, you two should know they're asking around, and that reward might be tempting to some folks in these parts." After Ben and his sons departed, Katherine paced the cabin, anxiety radiating from her in waves. "They're getting closer, Zach. Victor won't stop until he finds me." Zach caught her hands, stilling her nervous movement. "We knew this might happen, Kat. But we have friends here now." Ben didn't give us away, even though that reward would mean a lot to a man trying to support 2 sons on a small ranch. "But others might not be so honorable," Katherine pointed out. "Then we need to make our situation more official," Zach replied, a determined look crossing his face. We need to get married, Kat. Properly married. Katherine blinked in surprise. Married? Now? How? There's a preacher who comes through the settlement about 10 miles from here every month, Zach explained. He's due in 3 days. If we were legally married, it would be harder for Victor to claim you're his. The practical reasoning behind the proposal might not have been romantic, but Katherine found herself nodding anyway. Marriage to Zach had been her dream for years, a dream she'd thought impossible when her father arranged her match with Victor. Yes, she said simply. Let's get married. The next 3 days were a flurry of preparation. Katherine worked to make a suitable dress from the limited fabric she had available, while Zach rode to Ben Miller's ranch to ask him to stand witness at the ceremony. Ben readily agreed, even offering to host a small celebration afterward at his home. On the morning of their wedding day, Katherine stood before the small mirror in their cabin, adjusting the pale blue dress she'd created. It wasn't the elaborate white gown she might have worn as Victor's bride, but it was made with love and hope, which made it infinitely more precious. Zach had left earlier to make sure everything was ready at the settlement, leaving Katherine to follow with Ben's wife Martha, who had kindly offered to help her prepare. As Katherine pinned her hair, trying to create some semblance of a bridal style, a knock at the door startled her. "Martha, is that you?" she called, moving toward the door. "I'm nearly ready." But it wasn't Martha Miller who stood outside. When Katherine opened the door, she found herself face to face with Victor Orwell. "Katherine," he said, his voice cold despite the smile on his lips. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Katherine stumbled backward, fear freezing her in place. Victor stepped into the cabin, followed by 2 of his men, the same ones who had pursued them through the mountains. "You've led me on quite a chase," Victor continued, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "Very inconsiderate after all the arrangements I made for our wedding." Finding her voice at last, Katherine straightened her spine, refusing to cower before him. "I'm not marrying you, Victor. I never wanted to." "What you want is irrelevant," Victor replied dismissively. "Your father signed a contract. You belong to me." "I belong to no one," Katherine declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "Least of all you." Victor's smile hardened into something ugly. "Where is your cowboy?" "Hiding in the barn, perhaps." "He's not here," Katherine answered truthfully. "And when he returns, he'll what?" Victor interrupted with a laugh. "Your precious Zachary O'Malley is in no position to challenge me. My men will deal with him when he returns." He turned to the 2 men behind him. "Search the property. Make sure O'Malley isn't lurking about." As the men departed to follow his orders, Victor stepped closer to Katherine, reaching out to touch her cheek. She jerked away from his touch, her back hitting the wall behind her. "You've cost me time and money, Katherine," Victor said, his voice deceptively gentle, "but I'm willing to overlook this indiscretion if you come with me now quietly." "Never," Katherine spat. "I'd rather die than be your wife." Victor's expression darkened. "That can be arranged. But first, I think I'll wait for your lover to return. I want him to watch as I take you away." Katherine's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. Zach would be returning soon, possibly with Martha Miller. If Victor's men were waiting, they'd ambush him without warning. "He won't be back until tomorrow," she lied, hoping to buy time. "He went to town for supplies." Victor studied her face, clearly skeptical. "Somehow I doubt that, especially given your attire." His gaze traveled over her blue dress, taking in the special touches that marked it as wedding clothes. "Were you planning something today, perhaps? A wedding?" Before Katherine could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Victor smiled coldly. "It seems your cowboy has returned sooner than expected." Katherine lunged for the door, desperate to warn Zach, but Victor caught her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Not so fast, my dear. Outside, one of Victor's men called out, "Mr. Orwell, riders approaching." Victor dragged Katherine to the window, keeping her firmly in his grasp as they watched Zach ride into the yard, accompanied not just by Martha Miller but by Ben and his sons as well. The small wedding party came to an abrupt halt at the sight of strange horses and armed men. Katherine saw the exact moment Zach recognized the danger, his body tensing, his hand moving subtly toward his gun. "I wouldn't, O'Malley," Victor called from the doorway, pushing Katherine in front of him like a shield. "Not unless you want your bride to suffer for it." Zach's eyes met Katherine's, a wordless communication passing between them. She could read the rage in his expression, but also the calculation, the desperate search for a way out of this trap. "Let her go, Orwell," Zach demanded, his voice steady despite the tension evident in every line of his body. "Your quarrel is with me." "On the contrary," Victor replied. "My quarrel is with both of you. Katherine was promised to me, a promise she broke when she ran away with you." He tightened his grip on Katherine's arm. "Dismount, all of you, slowly." Ben Miller, looking confused but alert to the danger, spoke up. "What's going on here, Zach? Who is this man?" "Victor Orwell," Zach answered, his eyes never leaving Katherine's face. "A businessman from Rico who thinks he can buy and sell people." "I assure you, Mr. Miller, this is simply a matter of retrieving what is legally mine," Victor said smoothly. "Miss Blackett was engaged to be my wife before this. Cowboy abducted her." "That's a lie," Katherine protested. "I left of my own free will." Ben's gaze shifted between them, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "So these are the strangers those men were looking for." "Indeed," Victor confirmed, "and there's a handsome reward for their return." "We don't want your money, mister," Ben stated firmly. "And from what I can see, the lady doesn't want to go with you." Victor's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Take your family and leave while you still can." Ben's sons bristled at the threat to their father, their hands moving toward their weapons. The tension in the yard ratcheted higher. "Stop," Katherine cried. "Please, no one needs to get hurt." She turned her head to look at Victor. "I'll go with you, just don't harm them." "Kat, no." Zach protested, taking a step forward only to freeze when Victor pulled a small derringer from his pocket, pressing it against Katherine's side. "A wise decision," Victor said to Katherine, ignoring Zach's outburst. "Now tell your cowboy to throw down his weapons." Katherine met Zach's gaze, her eyes conveying what she couldn't say aloud, that she had a plan, that she needed him to trust her. "Do as he says, Zach, please." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might risk everything on a desperate attempt to save her. Then, slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall to the ground. "The rifle, too," Victor instructed. Nodding toward the saddle scabbard, Zach complied, removing the Winchester and placing it beside his pistol. Ben and his sons followed suit, disarming under the watchful eyes of Victor's men. "Now," Victor said, satisfaction evident in his voice, "Miss Blackett and I will be leaving. Anyone who attempts to follow us will be dealt with, permanently." "Wait," Katherine said suddenly. "Let me get my things." Victor laughed. "You won't need anything from this. Hovel, I'll buy you whatever you require once we return to civilization." "Please," Katherine insisted. "Just my mother's locket, it's all I have of her." Victor hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Be quick about it." Katherine moved back into the cabin, Victor following closely behind her, the derringer still trained on her. Inside, she moved to the small chest near the bed where she kept her few personal belongings. "You're making a mistake, Victor," she said quietly as she opened the chest. "I'll never be the wife you want." "You'll be exactly what I want," Victor replied coldly. "In time, you'll learn your place." Catherine's fingers closed around her mother's locket and the small knife Zach kept hidden beneath his spare shirts. In one fluid motion, she whirled around, the knife flashing as she slashed at Victor's gun hand. Victor howled in pain and surprise, the derringer discharging harmlessly into the floor as he dropped it. Katherine kicked it away, brandishing the knife before her as she backed toward the door. "Zach!" she screamed. Outside, chaos erupted. The sound of the gunshot galvanized Zach into action. He dove for his discarded weapons, rolling to avoid the shots fired by Victor's startled men. Ben and his sons scattered, taking cover behind horses and the corner of the barn. Katherine burst through the door, knife in hand, with a bleeding Victor right behind her. Zach fired twice in rapid succession, forcing Victor back into the doorway. One of Victor's men fell, clutching his shoulder, while the other returned fire from behind a water trough. "Get down, Kat!" Zach shouted. Katherine dropped to the ground, crawling toward the relative safety of the corral. A bullet splintered the wood near her head, sending fragments flying. She felt a sharp sting as one cut her cheek but kept moving. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. When it ended, one of Victor's men lay dead, the other wounded and disarmed. Victor himself stood in the cabin doorway, hands raised, a look of cold fury on his face. Zach approached him cautiously, rifle aimed at his chest. "It's over, Orwell. This will never be over," Victor spat. "She belongs to me. I have a contract with her father, not with her," Zach interrupted. "And contracts don't hold up well against bullets, I find." Ben Miller moved to Zach's side, his own rifle trained on Victor. "We should take them to the sheriff, Zach. Do this properly." Katherine joined them, still clutching the knife, blood trickling from the cut on her cheek. "Ben's right. I want this finished legally and permanently." Zach nodded, though his eyes never left Victor's face. "Tie him up. We'll take them all to town." With Victor and his surviving man securely bound, they set out for the settlement, where the circuit judge happened to be visiting along with the preacher. The small judicial office was thrown into confusion by their arrival, a wounded prisoner, a dead body draped over a horse, and a determined group of ranchers demanding justice. The judge, a practical man with a keen sense of right and wrong, listened to their story with growing concern. Katherine presented her case clearly, describing Victor's threats and coercion, the contract her father had signed under financial duress, and their flight to escape a forced marriage. Victor, for his part, maintained his innocence, claiming Katherine had been abducted and that he was merely attempting to rescue her. But his story fell apart under questioning, particularly when Ben Miller and his sons testified to what they had witnessed. "Miss Blackett," the judge said finally, "in my view, no contract signed by your father can compel you to marry against your will. Mr. Orwell, on the other hand, has committed serious crimes, attempted kidnapping, assault, and if what these witnesses say is true, attempted murder." Victor's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. I am a respected businessman. You can't possibly—" "I can and I will," the judge interrupted firmly. "You'll be held for trial at the county seat. Given the testimony here today, I expect you'll be spending many years considering the error of your ways." As Victor was led away, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't truly over. There would be a trial, testimony to give, perhaps threats from Victor's associates, but the immediate danger had passed. "Are you all right?" Zach asked softly, taking her hand. Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. "Yes. But I believe we had a wedding planned." Zach smiled, the tension finally easing from his face. "We still do, if you're willing." "More than willing," Katherine assured him. The preacher, who had witnessed the entire proceeding with wide eyes, readily agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. And so, in the small settlement church, with Ben and Martha Miller as witnesses, Katherine Blackett became Katherine O'Malley, her blue dress slightly torn and blood-stained, her cheek bandaged, but her heart full to bursting with love and relief. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, beaming at the young couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. O'Malley." Zach took Katherine's face gently in his hands, mindful of her injury, and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mine," he whispered against her lips. "Always, always," she agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The celebration at Ben Miller's ranch was simple but joyful, with neighbors arriving as word spread of the day's events and the impromptu wedding. Katherine found herself welcomed into the small community, no longer a fugitive but Mrs. Zachary O'Malley, a respectable rancher's wife. Late that night, as they returned to their cabin, now truly their home, Zach lifted Katherine into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, which someone had thoughtfully tidied after the confrontation with Victor. "It feels different now," Katherine observed, looking around the familiar space, "knowing he can't come after us anymore." "It is different," Zach agreed, taking her hands in his. "We're free to build our life together without looking over our shoulders." There was still one shadow on their happiness, though. "I need to write to my father," Katherine said. "Let him know what happened, that I'm safe and married." "We'll send a letter tomorrow," Zach promised. "And perhaps, when things have settled, we can invite him to visit." In the weeks that followed, they fell into a rhythm of work and togetherness that filled Katherine with contentment. The cabin began to feel truly like home as she added small touches: curtains at the windows, flowers on the table, a quilt she started piecing together from fabric Martha Miller had given her as a wedding gift. Word came from town that Victor had been transported to the county seat to await trial, his influence insufficient to secure his release on bail given the serious nature of the charges. Katherine would need to testify eventually, but for now, they were free to focus on their life together. A letter arrived from her father in early autumn, carried by a traveling merchant. Katherine read it with trembling hands, half afraid of what it might contain. But her fears proved unfounded. Her father expressed relief that she was safe, remorse for his role in pushing her toward Victor, and cautious happiness about her marriage to Zach. He even mentioned the possibility of visiting in the spring, once the mountain passes were clear. "He's not angry," she told Zach that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. "He says he should have seen Victor for what he was, should have trusted my judgment." Zach squeezed her hand. "He was desperate, Kat. Desperate people don't always make the best decisions." "I know." She leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his understanding. "He wants to visit in the spring." "He's welcome anytime," Zach assured her. "He's family now." Family. The word filled Katherine with warmth. From the moment she'd fled Rico with Zach, she'd been building a new family, a chosen one based on love rather than obligation. Winter came early to the mountains that year, the first snow falling before the end of October. The cabin, snug and warm with a fire crackling in the hearth, became their haven against the cold. They spent the long evenings planning for the future expansions to the cabin, additions to their small herd, crops for the coming spring. In December, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She shared the news with Zach on Christmas morning, watching his face transform with joy as he processed her words. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're having a baby." Katherine nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around the cabin until they were both dizzy with happiness. "Careful," she protested, though she was laughing too hard to sound serious. You'll make me ill." Zach set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "When? How long have you known? The baby should come in July," she told him. "And I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be sure before I told you." The news spread quickly through their small community, bringing neighbors with gifts and well wishes despite the snowy conditions. Martha Miller became a frequent visitor, bringing advice and patterns for baby clothes, having raised 4 children of her own. Spring brought the melt, turning the creek into a rushing torrent and the paths to mud. It also brought Katherine's father, who arrived one bright April morning on a sturdy mule, looking older and more careworn than when Katherine had last seen him, but with a light in his eyes that had been missing during those dark days in Rico. "Father." Katherine rushed to greet him, her pregnancy now obvious beneath her loose dress. "Katie," he said, using the childhood nickname she hadn't heard in years. "Look at you married and expecting. You've done well for yourself, despite my best efforts to ruin your life." "Don't say that," Katherine chided, hugging him tightly. "You did what you thought was best." "I was a fool," her father replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I nearly sold you to a monster for the price of a failing ranch." Zach approached, extending his hand to his father-in-law. "What matters is that you're here now, sir." Katherine's father looked at Zach appraisingly, then ignored the outstretched hand to pull him into a rough embrace. "Thank you for saving my daughter when I couldn't." "She saved herself," Zach replied honestly. "I just gave her somewhere to run to." The visit lasted 2 weeks, during which Katherine watched the 2 most important men in her life forge a genuine bond. Her father helped Zach with projects around the ranch, offering advice based on his years of experience. In return, Zach showed him the prosperity they were building, the security he could provide for Katherine and their child. "I'm selling the ranch in Rico," her father announced on his last evening with them. "Got an offer that will clear the debts with a little left over. I thought I might look for something smaller, perhaps closer to here." "You could stay with us," Katherine offered immediately. "We have room, or will once Zach finishes the addition." Her father smiled, touched by the offer. "That's kind, but you 2 need your space, especially with the baby coming. But I won't be far, I promise you that." When he departed the next morning, Katherine felt not the pain of separation, but the comfort of knowing their family had expanded. Bridges rebuilt that she had feared burned beyond repair. July arrived with blazing heat and clear skies. Katherine's time grew near, bringing with it both excitement and anxiety. Zach became increasingly protective, reluctant to leave her alone even for short periods. "The baby won't come the minute you ride to check the north pasture," Katherine teased one morning as Zach hesitated at the door. "I know," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "But what if today is the day? Then Martha will be here within the hour, as she has been every day this week," Katherine reminded him, referring to their neighbor who had promised to attend the birth. "Go, we'll be fine." But as fate would have it, that was indeed the day. Katherine felt the first pains mid-morning while hanging laundry to dry in the summer sun. By the time Zach returned for his midday meal, her labor was well established, and Martha had been sent for. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. Katherine drew strength from Zach's presence, his hand steady in hers even when her grip must have been painful. Martha's calm competence was a balm to both their nerves, her soft voice guiding Katherine through each contraction. As dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Zach's eyes. Katherine, exhausted but triumphant, cradled the tiny bundle to her chest, marveling at the perfect fingers and the shock of dark hair that already promised to be as unruly as his father's. "He's beautiful," Zach whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Catherine's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. Like his mother. "What shall we call him?" Catherine asked, looking up at her husband's awestruck face. Zach considered for a moment. "William, after my father. William Thomas O'Malley." "It's perfect," Catherine agreed, smiling down at their son. "Welcome to the world, William." In the years that followed, their family grew along with their ranch. Catherine's father settled on a small property just a few miles away, becoming a beloved grandfather to William and, 2 years later, to his sister Elizabeth. Victor Orwell was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison, effectively removing his shadow from their lives. The cabin expanded into a proper house, with separate bedrooms for the children, a larger kitchen where Catherine taught Elizabeth to bake, and a wide porch where the family gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset. Their herd increased, as did their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Zach's dream of building something worthwhile had become reality, with Catherine as his partner in every sense. On their 10th anniversary, Zach surprised Catherine with a special gift, a gold locket to replace her mother's, which had been damaged in the confrontation with Victor. Inside the new locket, he had placed a tiny portrait of their family, painted by a traveling artist who had stayed with them the previous winter. "It's beautiful," Catherine exclaimed, immediately putting it on. "I'll treasure it always." "Just as I treasure you," Zach replied, taking her hands in his. "Every day I thank God that you had the courage to run away with me." Catherine smiled, thinking of that frightened young woman she had been, standing at the crossroads of her life. "I wasn't running away," she corrected gently. "I was running toward something, toward you, toward us, toward this life we've built together." Zach pulled her into his arms, his kiss as tender as it had been on their wedding day. "Mine," he murmured against her lips. "Always." "Always," Catherine agreed, her heart full with the knowledge that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had loved her since they were children. The man who had claimed her not as a possession but as his partner, his equal, his love. And as the sun set over the mountains that had once been their refuge and were now simply the backdrop to their happiness, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. In choosing love over fear, she had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but fulfillment, not just a husband but a life worth living, a life built on love, respect, and the unbreakable bond between two hearts that had always been destined to beat as one.